First thing to consider is what you are clearly entirely aware of, which is that we're working with, and to some extent, in my opinion, having to fight against a particular ideal of play. So that's kind of counterintuitive, right? You say, I've got my ideal of play, Adept Consulting, shall you help me realize my ideal of play? And the first thing I'm saying is, fuck your ideal, right? That doesn't seem, doesn't seem quite right. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I want to reach for the ideal that has been discovered through play rather than the one that has sort of become, we've talked about this online already, the one that has sort of become really cherished only mainly by talking about it.
Right.
And that's kind of our design, one of the design issues. Another issue, which I don't think you're quite in yet, but I haven't looked at your documents yet because I just got them. But is the difference between playing as a form, I mean, and writing for play design, writing for design versus writing what you think of as the finished text. Now, some people are very production oriented and it helps them create the game to work on the produced version at the same time. These are people who are
Uh-huh.
very graphics heavy and sort of think with one hand on Adobe and stuff like that while they design. And so they're already making their three-dimensional boxes and thinking about the right font and page, color, page, paper type and stuff like that as they go. But typically, unless I'm dealing with that person, who would be Jason Morningstar, is a good example. But unless I'm dealing with that person, um, I say the best thing to do is to stop writing that document. That
Okay.
writing the document so that you're introducing it to other people, or perhaps to treat that document as a form of play. I mean, of a form of recreational relaxation, rather than trying to design in that context. Because if you're trying to explain it to the reader and you're imagining yourself as the producer of this product and the author being read by an audience, if you're doing that at the same time as you're trying to work out how the game actually works, there's a tendency for the latter to overtake it, and you end up basically creating a very readable, very beautiful bad game. And so
Right.
that's kind of the problem, because I've noticed in this school, or kind of ideal of game design, the desire to share it with people. That's a big part of this ideal is we're going to share this. We're going to, lots of people are going to be playing this who never tried this before. And so the idea that the sort of um, spread the word ideal is a big part of this. So right now, let's just kind of dial that back and say, all right, let's just talk about how this game plays. Can you tell me a little bit? Let's do it the way that I really think it should always start. Give me the colorful description of what we're doing. I mean, of the fiction. But I want the stuff that just kicks it right off. Says, okay, what are we playing here?
Okay, so essentially, uh, it's inspired by Game of Thrones, and it's built so that you can take an adventurous like aspect, uh, more of the Snow type of role, but it's also built for political intrigue, and the depth to which you go into either is contingent upon how you form relationships in the beginning. And
Okay.
it is not a huge relationship map. You're forming one relationship with
Hmm.
one other member. That's it. And it's a short one. So I'm
Sure.
trying to get into the game. I cannot go too crazy on that end.
Let's
Uh,
back up a little bit. You just sort of started with Game of Thrones and started talking about Game of Thrones characters. Let's kind of go
hmm,
back. I'm looking at that cover sketch that you sent me,
yeah.
and I'm psyched. And I say, "What's this?" And I don't want to hear about some TV show.
Right.
I don't. What's this? What am I looking at? There's naked ladies. There's like scary people talking. What is this? It's cool. Tell me.
So the idea is to make it Machiavellian, but not have it fall into blood sport or blood opera, and be over so quickly or be so myopic that that's all it's about.
But
So
why
when
is
I
it called
compare,
House of Spiders? I'm trying to be in the frame of mind, which is my preferred frame of mind. So it's not a fake. My preferred frame of mind is this looks cool. What is it about in raw fictional terms?
right? So House of Spiders, essentially what that's pointing to is in a realm or a kingdom, you have different lords of different houses.
Mm-hmm.
And in this game, you play different members, whether of the same house or other houses. So I could be an emissary, I could be a lord, I could be a knight, what have you. But there's always an element where you're playing the great game on some level.
Right. Okay.
And so house is referring to the house that you're belonging to. Spiders is referring to, you know, sorry about the little or the Game of Thrones, but kind of like a Littlefinger character, you know.
So the idea basically being intrigue, dark deeds, secrets, alliances, and betrayals, and a sense of, I'm taking this a little further, lies that are dangerous enough that you get trapped in them,
Right.
and so, half the people are operating on lies and doing good or bad, half people are operating on truths, doing good or bad, and so on and so forth. And then you
Yeah, and it's about
mix it all in with who's having sex with who and who just killed who.
right, but you mix it in to make it more complex into duty and the difficulty of doing good in such a world, and things of that nature, and whether the means and the ends, and you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Whether you have to
Well,
break
that's
some
great.
eggs.
And again, I want to get away from talking about it in terms of principles and more in terms of talking about it in terms of plain fictional imagery.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about how you see the person that I'm kind of being, very honestly being at the moment, is not interested in ideals of gameplay and game design and mechanisms or anything like that. This person is
Right.
interested in who the cool lady is on the cover.
Right.
And this person wants to know, I want to know, what do we play? What do I do?
So I have a thing called a situation
Mm-hmm.
that kind of is the grounding point that you would play for a given scenario.
Right.
Do you mind if I just read you one of those really quick, and it will give you kind of a flair, an idea
Yeah,
of
yeah,
where the
sure.
fiction begins, and then from that we can go to whatever.
So,
Is it okay if I
yes.
document, or is that going to mess some stuff up?
Oh, yeah. No, you won't. No, go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. So this is an example of a starting situation. The houses have gathered in the capital for the annual have just gathered in the capital for the annual festival to pay tribute to the king of the realm. There is jousting, entertainment, earthly celebration. It's time for the houses to take measure of one another, to personally and politically explore hidden motives and tease out your enemies among supposed allies. A time for deal making and the dirty art of politics. A time to gain or lose power. During the festival, the king has fallen ill and will surely die. It will not be a natural death, that much is clear. Was it poison, blood, or black magic, a curse, or something more unspeakable? Surely foul play was involved. Surely deceit is rampant. Suspicion and rumor fill the air as the members of different houses compete for influence and maneuver for political power. There are competing claims to the throne, some legitimate, some more legitimate, and some more questionable. Will the crown be overthrown? Will the succession be gained honorably by force, by trickery or deceit? Will war come? Within the chaos there lies much opportunity. No matter your birth, whether low or high, let the maneuvering begin. The throne and the fate of the realm lie in balance. So that's just one small example, but you could have an introduction, just a setting that was based on, for something cliche, going to kill a dragon.
Okay.
you know, you
Well,
name it. So,
let's stick with what you're talking about, and let's
okay.
also stick with the idea that, again, from this kind of colorful perspective, I'm interested in uh, the I'm interested in how much of the setting and the situation itself. Oh well, I know you leave the situation very wide open in a wide number of ways, which is good. But I'd like to
Right.
know if when we joust, we are riding six-legged lizards or whether we are riding horses. I would like to know if we are
Okay.
using energy lances or whether we are using, iron-tipped, lances. Um, I'd like to know if we have fleas or if we are all, have a cyberjack in the back of our necks.
Right.
So,
Okay.
um, if you say, "Oh, geez, whatever, make it up," that's an answer, but I don't know if it's an answer. So tell me what I need to know in order to play at that level.
Okay. We're basically dealing with a world that has very little gonzo.
Hmm.
That's that's who I'm building this for. I think it it's been a problem with GMless games that I've seen. And so the type of humor I want is the type of humor that is based on wit and is earned. And I want to give the tools to do that.
Okay, I'm getting it's very interesting. I keep asking about like what kind of food the characters eat, and we keep getting into principles.
I'll
But
give you exactly what and see if I can hit it.
mhm.
Okay, so this the type of magic style, for example, would that be a good way to approach this, or am I missing
um,
it still?
I'm just asking, are we playing in kind of a fairly historical, with allowances for the fact that it's fiction and we're never going to be, encyclopedics here. But are we talking about uh, fairly down and dirty, human history oriented play? Um, Even if it's a kind of literary or cinematic version of history, that's what we're talking about. There is at least a nod to doing that. Um, or like many games of this design type, is it wide open, fill in the gap how the group will, um, and there's a lot of gap. Um, Basically, if there's a cool picture on the cover, can I be expect to be playing in that picture, or is that just an example of something somebody could make up? Um,
Uh, you'll mostly be playing within the pitcher. You'll have
cool.
a little bit of wiggle room.
Okay.
So it's not going to be exactly history. You're not going to be, you know, going to the bathroom in the streets with slop and flies and everybody dying of the plague. So it will be kind of a fictionalized thing, but there will be an element of magic, but it's going to be a small part. It will
Right.
be mysterious, rare,
Yeah.
dangerous. There'll
Yeah.
be risk involved. So
No, that works, and I mean it's a very very well understood, a very well understood thing. People have been writing in this vein long before there was television or movies and stuff like that. So okay.
right,
Now with this in mind, um, and the idea that we are for the large part working with a setting that we can think of as referenced textually rather than or invoked textually at the very least, rather than saying, okay, we're creating our own. We're going to have a tenants phase. We're going to sit down and we're going to create it all, right? So we're not really doing that so much. Okay, so
not as
that in
much.
mind, yeah. With that in mind, sounds good. The next step, and this is investigation, but now I'm going to start to kind of probe at this. You've already alluded to what you're thinking of as a relatively light setup for the characters, enough to play, enough to start, enough to grow, but not enough to lock down. Okay, this is the day before. We are not in Act 4 halfway through of Hamlet, right?
Right.
That it's the everybody's body's on the floor is going to happen in 10 minutes. No, that's not where we're at. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of room for, oh, well, there is a lot of room for uh, things to proceed, for time to occur, for relationships to change, for identities to be fleshed out through ordinary play before anybody has to suddenly have a schizophrenic break or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay, with that's I'm beginning to see that as the ideal. In a game of the kind we're talking about here, and especially if we're using a model that's quite episodic and not just a one-shot, point and shoot and done kind of thing. Playing a game where we do want to watch the characters grow. We want to see the intrigue develop. We want to be looking at it and say, here we are in installment 7, and we would never be anywhere near this situation if it hadn't been for the precise events of installments 1 through 6. And look at the mess we have made. Right? With that in mind, room to breathe is actually pretty important.
Yeah.
And yeah, the room to breathe concept is very, very interesting because it's also room to fall, room to fall flat, room to fail.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to become more and more and more of a proponent of that rather than an opponent of it. This is something else that it might sound like I'm jumping around, but I'm not. Are you primarily thinking of this as a game that's played through encountering people at conventions and it being effectively an activity that you're bringing to a bunch of people who don't have it? Or does it make more sense to own the game? A person like me owns the game, and I bust it out periodically because it's a really fun game to play, and we either will continue with it for quite a while, perhaps, or even if it's short form play, we'll come back to it, again because we like it.
Right.
That's with now
The
this is
latter.
yeah. Now this is important because I'm really seeing that an immense amount of game design in this day and age is being conducted as the former. And so people are basically thinking of something as, well, okay, here's my game. We're going to play it. You're going to see how awesome it is. We're going to have an awesome time. Slam bang, slam bang. Okay, we've done it. And my game is awesome. And if it's in a playtest convention, you've gained buzz now. You've gained some rep.
Right.
And if it's, but otherwise, the idea is that in many ways, this can be dangerous. You'll be hearing me talking about this with some other people in some consults I'm putting up, so I won't spend too much time on it. This can be dangerous because what you're selling is your performance and your ability to people manage, and not really anything that the game offers very much. So that means we need to really look at this as a play procedure. We say, what is this play procedure that really gives us something to do here? There are lots of games, some of them licensed, obviously, to properties like you've been describing. Not all licensed games are poor. Many of them are. What is it that, and in many ways, it's a good idea. If someone says, hey, let's play a Game of Thrones kind of game, and somebody says, oh, I got the Game of Thrones RPG right here, and someone else says, oh, but I got House of Spiders, I would tend to gravitate toward House of Spiders. Because one, I
Right.
don't really know what it is, and I want to invoke that kind of thing and do it rather than risk the kind of fan thing. With this in mind, tell me a little bit about what makes this game work particularly well for the kind of ambiguous and slightly unpredictable intrigue. In fact, more than slightly, rather unpredictable intrigue that can ensue when all these things are at stake and you have people of varying degrees of privilege. Everybody's lying or everybody's telling unwelcome truths, and crimes are being committed in the dark, and that sort of thing. So how does the game make that happen in a fashion that we couldn't do with a very, very ordinary role-playing game? Because after all, I mean, if you just make it happen because you like this kind of story, couldn't I just make up my character with his strength and his intelligence score, and you make up your character with his strength and intelligence score, and I've got my skills and you've got your skills, and we've got this great and wonderful and talented GM here who will take care of us, and we will do this. Well, we can play this. We don't need your fucking fancy game to do it, right? So,
Right.
what is the no? You say no, no, no. This is special fancy role, special fancy. So tell me
So
about that.
I think it's how the narrative's constructed. So there's different narrative phases. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm going to get into the main mechanic.
Hmm.
Um, it's only going to happen over about 2 to 4 sessions, and it's going to tell a story more like a movie than it is like a long campaign. Uh,
Right. Okay.
I'm going to use something kind of like an analogy to describe the way my main mechanic works, but it's not exactly like this. Okay, so take Fiasco for example, right? So you know how you lift up a dice at some point and you go in one direction or the other.
Hmm.
So in House of Spiders, in nearly every scene, what you're doing is your character wants a narrative outcome, and it's from your character's perspective.
Hmm.
So they want something in every scene, and something is driving them in every scene. And you're playing as a group, and you're directing that scene with your character, which is common. Uh, and so you get to a point where you're on the precipice of the scene, just on the cusp of where that decision is made. So you're kind of at the edge of that conflict. So let's say I escaped from a dungeon and the king wants my head. And I've been wandering in the forest starving, and I come to a tavern and I go in to get some food, but I see the king's men. Uh-oh. So what happens?
Right.
What do I want as they pull their sword? I want to win the fight.
Hmm.
Okay? So before that happens, we stop and we ask all the players, do you want it to happen? Do you want me to win the fight, my character, from his perspective, her perspective, or do you want me to lose? Then they all blind vote. So take, for example, say we all have either red or green tokens.
I'm
And we go
looking
one,
right
two.
now. Yeah, I'm looking right now at your diagram for this. So go on. Go ahead and tell me.
Oh, okay.
So keep going. Yes.
So 1, 2, 3, and then we reveal them. And what I've found is almost always, unless the story is going in a really good direction, people disagree.
Sure.
And so this
Yeah.
is the way it works. If the overwhelming amount of tokens, if all the tokens say they turn up red, and there's 5 of us, right? Then I don't get what I want, and something additionally in the narrative goes wrong for me. Something else doesn't go good. Now, if I have more reds than greens, then I get what I want, but something else happens at a cost, a complication, whatever.
You mean more greens
I have
than
more.
reds? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be picky. I'm just trying to
No, no,
understand.
no. Sorry.
More greens
Yeah,
than
if I'm
reds.
saying
Yes, yeah. More greens than
you
reds
get what.
means yeah, I get what I want, but there's a problem. So yeah, I
Yeah,
get it.
and the
So
reverse. If more red, then you
yes,
don't get what you want, but you get something, and then all
all
greens, you get
green.
what you want, and you get something else.
Now
So,
here's the thing though. I'm looking at this and just I'm going to, as a person sitting at the table, I'm going to be holding one token for this purpose, or does each one of us have three? How does that work? Right.
each one of us has one. My
Got
apologies.
it. Yeah. Each one of us has one. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, good enough. And I will play that guy just for a second, the kind of playtester or game consultant that I actually dislike, who says, "Oh, but what about a tie?" You know what? I know you have a rule for ties. Don't even bother to tell me. So,
Right.
and then I believe you. So, um, so okay. So this is our procedure now. What? Ooh. How adjustable is the graininess? How adjustable is the grain? So
Uh,
you're familiar with Troll Babes. You can adjust the pace of a given conflict so that it's going to be carried out all in one roll in one, which can have rerolls and stuff, but all in one chunk basically, or whether, which is what you've just described to me, or you
Hmm.
can adjust the grain to a much finer level where there's going to be you can adjust it to a medium level where each chunk is a substantial bit but not the entire conflict, or you can adjust
Right.
it to a level where it's pretty much action by action.
Okay.
And so
So
so here what you described was the coarsest grain.
yeah, so it can go anywhere. What it is what you want as a narrative outcome. So the narrative outcome could be the whole damn town burns down.
Right.
So you're telling a story. Is that what you mean by graininess, or am I
I
misunderstanding that?
I'm speaking specifically of the fight rather than the impact of secondary effects. I'm saying that when we look at the outcome, and I'm looking at the five of you and my little green. Wait, do I vote too, by the way, in my own conflict?
Yes, you do.
Okay. All right. So, well, in that case, I'm looking at my one little green, and I'm looking at the rest of you assholes, and I've got four reds. Yeah, I've got the four reds staring at me. And
Uh-huh.
my question, and I don't think of this as me skating for advantage or trying to wiggle. I genuinely need to know in order to play how much
Uh,
of the fight have we just resolved.
as much as you want, whatever you say narratively, and then they vote. Just a caveat too. I know this is, in your view, appealing to your higher nature and your
Yeah,
higher
yeah,
angel's nature,
yeah, yeah. That's
but
okay.
the story's design, the game is designed for people. What I found is the game's designed for people who want a good story and don't want to win.
Right. I
So
get
that's
that.
the
And
I-
that's not
um
that I don't have an objection to that. I'm very big on the
oh,
shared aesthetic purpose of what we're doing, but I will also say that the advocacy for one's character and the somewhat grander or dangerously abstract notion of the good story can come into conflicts and as not as a conflict, a personal conflict that bad people have, but as a genuine aesthetic grinding of gears.
right.
So therefore, I mean, not just between people, but like in your head. So
Yeah, the
therefore,
vision of
yeah,
the story is going to probably that you thought was good is going to involve your protagonist. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and all sorts of things, and it becomes tricky because then we can go lots of places in this particular exchange of ideas. What I'd like to focus on is during play, it's a good idea for me to know, and I wasn't really talking about outcomes yay or nay. I was talking about the scope of how much this particular vote covered. So it's a
Right.
good idea for me to go into this knowing whether this vote covers half the fight or all of it. Because
Right.
if
So
it mhm. If it
oh,
doesn't, if we decide afterward, then the opportunity for the gear grinding begins, because some of me in there cognitively is going to say, well, if I lost, well, I can say it's just half the fight. Let's see how the rest goes. And
right.
I'm
So you
not talking about, angling, to be a griefer, right?
yeah,
I'm just talking about what will happen because of the lack of certainty and knowledge of what the hell we're doing right now.
right. So at that point,
Hmm.
what essentially happens is everybody goes, "What does your character want?" And you say exactly what it is they want,
Right,
and
right.
that's
Okay,
dealt with
so
basically.
let's say I feel as though I'm looking after languishing in the dungeon for a while. I'd like to give these Kingsmen a real run for their money, and I'm feeling my oats, and maybe I'm feeling a certain amount of social support, and that's important here in the moment. I'm feeling a little bit of social support, and I'm thinking, you know what? All I'm going for right now is to jump on that table and jump off with the drumstick that one of them was eating and be eating it, right? And I'm still in the room. I'm not escaping or anything. I'm fuck them, right? I mean, I jumped on there. I want what I all I want, but all I want, everybody, all I want is that drumstick, and I
Right.
want to bite.
Right.
And everybody votes. And
Right.
let's say I get it. And of course, I might even vote against myself just so I make sure that I get a no, a yes, but because
Oh,
obviously yes, but now they are loaded. Now now they're throwing knives, they're throwing pots, they're coming at me. They just unleashed the dog. The idea being that let's say I get a yes, but mostly green, and that's great because I got my drumstick. I was able to sneer at them. I got my bite. But on the other hand, they're all coming after me now, right?
right.
They're oh man. And so that's great. And then I will say, well, my next thing is to just get out of there safely.
Right.
Lose their trail. They lose my trail. I want to get out. Um,
Right.
or we suddenly could realize that we're having a wonderful time with this kind of 1970s Three Musketeers movie kind of scene, and have a few more exchanges where it's me basically running around, trying to escape, or maybe I feel like I want to kick one of them in the head along the way. And, so we have a few exchanges in there, each one with its own vote. In your experience, what has been the scope of such conflicts as covered by a vote?
So it would be something a little more actionable. So if we took the instance that you just talked about, usually what would happen is you would just describe and that would just happen. So basically what your thing in the scene is called the big want.
Right.
Okay? What you most want. You can do whatever you want in a scene so long as everybody doesn't go, come on, man, that's
Right.
the big want. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Yeah.
So
Don't get that for free. Yeah.
you would talk about you doing this. Maybe
Right.
somebody would play a heckler in the back, or
Right.
whatever, or
Right.
women going woo or whatever.
Right. Right. So the big want then would be that, well, I'm confronted by the king's men. I want to get out of here. I want to be safe. I'm not
Right.
going. I'm not going back to the dungeon. So okay.
Right. So you would get
So
to do all that, but then you want to escape.
right. Well, so this is as clarified. I mean, there is such a thing then in practice. It may not. It might be good to say that. Well, you can always adjust the grain, but in practice, the big want is a big grain. It's fairly
Exactly.
substantial. Let's take a look then at this notion of we are playing and we're going to resolve the big want. And we're going to perhaps have a little bit lost. To what extent does the opportunity for one of them to get in a lucky shot so that I get. Okay, you see, this is handled by yes, but in many ways. Yes, you get away, but one of them clips you with a bullet, so your arm is bleeding. You get away safe. They're
Right.
not going to catch you. You got your want, but now you're like worse off than you were before. Maybe you shouldn't have fucked with them quite that bad. So,
Right.
right, and so that kind of thing. But still, that has a doneness to it. Where is the tension of suddenly seeing that one of them, and now I know they may not have pistols. I'm just making this up. All right, just out of second,
Right.
just out of the moment. Um, and what is the moment when it's all been fun and games, and it's not like they really want to spend their time tracking some damn outlaw through the woods tonight either. You know, they wouldn't mind catching me if it
Yeah.
were easy, but I'm not making it easy, so they might say screw it. Um, but the drumstick was the last straw, according to someone at the table, and one of them's drawing a bead on
Right.
me with his pistol. Where is that sense of sudden terror of, oh, I had a chance to get out of here, whole, but that chance just became less than 100.
Okay.
All of a
So
sudden, right
let me
now,
get
things are
you.
more dangerous than they were in the middle of the conflict prior to knowing how it turns out.
Right. So let me give you an example that happened in a game. So basically, the people who decide this, you can decide it with the person, but typically we try to avoid the conversation thing.
Right.
And one side picks the yes, this is what happened. One side picks the but. So you don't get out of there, but you get something or you do get out of there, but something bad happens.
Right.
Okay, so in the game, the person is fooling around, being cavalier, and the cook knows that he's going to get a reward, so he comes up behind him, he knocks him out with a pan. He wakes up, he's on one of the horses, and he is able to loosen the rope enough to pull it off the saddle and get it around the throat of the gentleman and choke him out and kill him. And he falls over. So he got away, but he knows that they're on their way back to the king. You could make the butt. He knows they're on their way, and they're going to report it right away, and everybody's after him. So
there's a lot of action in that narration that is not accounted for by resolution mechanics and is a subroutine, a verbal subroutine of the yes and of the but. Now, this is a kind of interesting because in such a game, when somebody is teaching it to people, and so simultaneously teaching it, but also showcasing it. So it's very important for you to have them to have a good time. In those circumstances, there's a tendency for that kind of narration as you just delivered not to be as democratic as the ideal of the game would have it. And so therefore there is a person who tends to be the raconteur of the play space. And certainly other people may get into it and be good at it too, and then you can have a lot of the trading off among people. But there is a tendency for there to be a lot more authority at the table than you would think just from reading the rules.
Right.
That's sort of something that I have no magic solution to. I am saying that it's something that a number of the games of this type, that's Primetime Adventures is a good example, have a tendency for people to take over that role, and often even to move things that I would call resolutions into their setup narrations. And so the danger basically is that we're opening in what is purported to be a fairly everyone plays, everyone gets to talk, everyone gets to create group creation kind of situation. There is the opportunity for it to become more of a one-person show, either for the whole session or in a kind of traded off way that isn't being traded off, I think, systemically so much as just kind of usurped, person by person. And so this is sort of the danger. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is how I'm imagining it now, and it may be adjusted. Can see what you think of it, but basically, the director of the scene, whose character it is, they can also play an NPC acting on their behalf, but let's put that aside.
Right.
The director of the scene, whose character it is, they would basically decide the good part, and the other person would decide the bad part.
Right.
But anybody actually, if there's not anything, if somebody says, I got a great idea, it might go that direction. Right. We'll have, those will be clarified like in steps,
Right. Right. It's a very, as you know, this is where things get tricky because then we have the risk of workshopping. How about? And so that's just part of the picture. I'm not saying that that's, a fatal flaw. I'm saying that that's kind of the issue. How does the procedure become a matter of building and continuing next, but, right. Not how about, oh, but why not? You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's the, this is really the distinction between the two is very, very easily lost. And so it's and again, I'm thinking of the really good times I've had with Primetime Adventures and the really bad times I've had. The really bad times come when that distinction is lost, and all of a sudden everybody's sitting around talking about what might happen. So, or what this could even be about. I'm thinking more in terms of the dynamic, and that particular dynamic of a we are glorying in the human ability to make a fictional situation exciting and consequential. There's no question. We are going
Right.
to enjoy this, and we are humans, and we're good at it, and we're not going to pretend that we're not. So, number one.
Right.
So that's great. Now, just like the analogy to competitive card play is sound, just because we're all good at casual competitive fun doesn't mean we don't need good rules for a card game. We
Yeah.
we actually
True.
we actually want good rules for a card game because of that desire and ability. So that's the
Oh,
exact logic.
definitely.
Yeah, that's exactly the logic that I'm using here. We've got the desire and the ability for generating the fiction into action, consequence, okay, meaning. I'll say that, and move along quickly before everybody gets excited. And, so fine, we're all good at this. But what are going to be the rules for what we do that are very similar conceptually or philosophically, very similar to the rules for playing hearts or the rules for playing pinochle? So you've talked to me about the voting kind of issue, and that's very good in terms of saying, okay, and now when everybody's looking, we in any number of card games, let's say at the end of the round, everybody has run out of cards. The way the game works is you keep throwing cards into the middle. And so at the end of the round, everybody's throwing, and we look and see who takes which cards, and puts them in their little bank. Okay, so we've been looking at it at that level. We've been saying, okay, well, you have this, you got the high card, and you had the suit that trumps all the rest. So regardless of high card, you take all the cards and put them in your little bank.
Uh-huh.
So right. So in other words, we've just talked about that, but somewhat at a larger scale, we're talking about how in this card game versus this other card game, we take turns in this fashion and we use up this much of our hand of cards. Or maybe there's, at the moment, uh, did we deal out the whole deck to start or not? Did we deal out only a little bit of the deck to start? Are we sitting there with our hands, with our cards open to each other? Are we sitting there with our cards secret? Do I start with no cards and everybody else starts with 10? Or do I start with 10 cards and everybody else starts with none? This kind of
Right.
organizational use of the available instrument is what I'm talking about at the larger
Right.
scale than just who wins this hand. So we talked about who
Right.
wins this hand. Does my character get away from the Kingsmen? I want to talk a little bit more about the larger scale now. I want to talk a little bit about how situations are organized. You mentioned how there is a particular director who is, for the most part, talking about their own character or reasonable representative thereof. And so they are telling us where that character is now, what is happening to them, and what they want out of it.
Right.
And we're going to trade that role around. Am I correct?
Right. Correct.
Okay. Now, do you ever have the opportunity to nab another character into a situation that was not immediately and obviously set up by the prior events? So I could say, okay, I'll ask the easy one first. Screw my character. I'm happy with my character in the dungeon. I want to put your character into this situation over there in their castle and see what happens to you when this happens. Am I
Okay.
allowed to do
So
that?
kind of, there's certain times when you can influence a character. There's a couple ways. So say in the narrative, I'm trying to convince your character of something. If they want me in the story to convince you of something, we don't have to say how you're convinced, right? Because
Okay,
narratively, we
right.
want your character to who your character is, but you do have to be convinced. Another rule is that sometimes these stories, they sprawl off into different directions, and so I have a rule where you get a narrative token, essentially. And the two ways you can do that are you can either build on somebody else's idea
Right.
in just a really great way, and that's decided by the group, or you take two disparate parts of the story and bring them together,
Sure.
whether it's story threads or
Yeah.
whatever. So say that happens. I'm toying with different ideas, but one is give that person an extra round whenever they want it. Since they're paying attention to the story and stuff,
They
that
might
would
as well
probably
get
work
to be
that
in
way
it,
too.
right?
Right. Another way besides giving them that extra round is making it so that in any scene, theirs or another scene, if the vote is, say, it's yes but,
Yeah.
they can switch it one rank, so they could make it no but or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Another thing is potentially bringing in a dice or something.
Right.
I have to, shop
Okay.
these and see how they
Okay.
work.
That also helps me to know just how wiggable at the moment you are. Because
Yeah.
you've played this a few times, but you're at a very early stage, which is actually a good thing. So,
Yeah.
we have plenty of things to concern ourselves with. But I actually was asking a question that was far simpler than what you were answering. It's my go, and it's legally my go. I didn't have to have anything special to do. It's my go. And
Yeah.
I'm going to, and ordinarily, I would talk about where my character is based on what's happened so far, either reasonably extended from where he was or right where he was, whatever, and or she or whoever. And as it turns out, because I've already got my semi-trans scheming, but very idealistic character in mind. I already made that up. So and I'm particularly happy with the somewhat surrealistically frothy / lacy dress that they wear.
Uh-huh.
I'm that character. I'm just letting you know. I've got my character going already. Okay, not the character who was jumping around in the tavern, but this character, right?
Okay, so this is how it would work.
Right. Well, so here's the thing, though. I would say ordinarily that this character is in a particular situation, and I will say her. We will see her doing this, and then what she wants out of this situation, as I begin to describe, and everybody's listening, and someone says, "Oh man, what do you want out of that?" And I say, "Aha, I want this," And so everybody's playing it, helping me play. They're coming up with ideas, and so and so says something, or someone tosses in something that kind of references something that happened in the past, in the play so far, and we've kind of got a rich scene going on here. That would be the ordinary thing. And I get that. But let's say I am being particularly enthusiastic. And so we're going to not be, again, I'm not talking about somebody who's trying to screw with the game. I'm talking about somebody who simply is perfectly happy with where their character was, their own character was, and wouldn't mind that just baking for a while everybody kind of wonders. Everybody's going to, oh man, after that, now what's she going to do? And he says, well, you know what? She's just going to think about that for a while. And then the turn comes back around to him, and everybody's like, oh, what's she going to do? What's she going to do? And he's like, nah, she's still thinking. Instead, your guy is was being chased by, the last we saw, he was being chased by the hounds. You know what? Those hounds, just got, how am I going to put it? I'm trying to find some way to make the hounds more interesting and not really coming up with it, but whatever. I extends the hounds chasing scene because I was really pumped about the hounds chasing scene. I don't feel like doing my character right now. I like the suspense of letting the character hang fire, and I am going to go and throw it on you instead. It is, for all intents and purposes, your scene. You say what you want out of this.
So you can do it.
That's what I'm asking.
But you can do it, but just to give a caveat, so you could use an NPC, whether it's the hounds or not, to go after another character, right? but it would somehow have to be connected to the interest of your character, whether
Right.
implicitly or
Right.
explicitly.
Yes, and that's
You can do
for let's so great. So in other words, your character is, I despise your character. My character despises yours. Maybe they started off not despising each other. We weren't even on each other's designated sheet, but events have been events, and now I really despise you. And so, I'm happy to set the hounds on you.
yeah,
And so, and it's good for my character if you get eaten by the hounds. So, there you go. So,
right.
so that's an important point. That actually the ability to do that opens up play in a highly productive fashion. For one thing, things can turn out well or badly for each other. I like your critter.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. For one thing, things can turn out well or badly for each other in unpredictable ways because of that, and in ways that are one step removed and therefore rather satisfying from a story standpoint. Um, Everybody, that's the way people get poisoned by accident, basically, right?
Right.
It's because of that. And so you have that. And then you also have the point that I'm not just a lamp being turned on my character every single time. There's something quite robotic about that,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm okay, good. That's really interesting, and I'm glad because everything you had said up until then, it kind of implied that you couldn't do that. So I'm glad to know, that there's a big scope for that. So the new director, it would be a pretty unimaginative director who couldn't figure out a way to do that to at least one other player at the table. I say do too. It doesn't have to be hostile. Maybe it's a character who's very positive toward my character and vice versa, and I just really want to give them, a chance to shine a little more, right? And so all that's great. And so that's okay. Okay. Do you see now what I mean about that level of card play? Now I'm
Yes.
learning more about the way we, you know, is the dealer all the way through? Does the dealer move to the left? That kind of logic, that kind of
Yeah,
framing of,
definitely.
of play. So with that in mind, another issue. When and how do characters and situations, things that characters can have effects upon, when do they receive consequences that are irrevocable and sometimes final?
So,
Huh.
say a character
And
death,
this is where Game of Thrones is not a good role model for us.
right? Character death has to happen in the late stage. There's different stages to
Ah.
the story
Mm-hmm.
where nothing's defined, but you're doing different things. For example, like uh, whether it's triggering the story, the conflict and drama, the climax, that resolution, those go in stages. So it isn't until later in the story. Um, you can always have a replacement character later on as well,
I get that,
but it
but
will be
the
later.
right. But I'm talking about irrevocable impact onto the fiction, whether a character or the things that a character can affect. Um, and so that's really what I'm talking about. And so the death is merely a subset thereof, and that's fine. But the deal I'm after is this, because you're talking about phases of play. Now, there are two ways to do it if we're talking about the extremes on a spectrum. So the one extreme is that the rules remain completely unchanged, but what can be accomplished in the fiction officially changes. Early stage, characters can't die. Late stage, characters can die. The procedures remain exactly the same, but what is permitted to occur as the extremity of the outcome. Another good example, somebody can get the throne for good. Somebody can really get the throne. That can't happen in
Right,
early play. It can happen in later play, but the system remains exactly the same.
right,
We're just talking about what can occur, that the want can occur, and that in the case of certain wants, they are irrevocable. So that's that.
right,
Number one. You could then slam to entirely the opposite extreme, which is that there is no restriction on the fiction that changes, or opportunity opened for the fiction that changes stage by stage. But the systemic effects are different. The procedures are altered.
Hmm.
Now we use the dice, and dice do this.
Right.
Now we use, or maybe in the beginning we use dice, maybe at the end we don't. I don't care, one or the other, right? But the point is
Right.
that, and that's just a very crude example of dice or not dice. There's lots of more subtle things. One could say that, for example, that in maybe strictures on voting start to occur, or maybe currency, like you talked about, where the ability to alter a vote kicks in a later stage that wasn't there in an earlier stage. So do you see what I mean? With in the one extreme, the rules stay the same, but the permissible fiction changes. At the other extreme, the permissible fiction is always open, but the rules become more hard hitting in terms of mechanical uh, devices
Right.
that
Uh,
will actually alter things in a different way. You have different angles of attack onto what can occur in a scene. Um,
right. I have my intuitions about where I'm going there,
right,
but it's going to have to play test. Like the dice would probably be earlier
right,
because the chaos would probably happen then. Um, I, death would probably be the only exception unless something challenged the coherency or verisimilitude of a story. As far as something that could happen late,
right.
or would
Um,
have to happen late.
what about
So these are just
right?
I'm thinking it right now.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's lots of different things. For one thing, death is a very interesting point here because the lens of one's character is one of those things that is much more adjustable. If the situation is such that I would have more fun if my character was at risk from the beginning,
Right.
that's actually things get very subtle when you start talking about death. Do you care about your character more or less when the risk of death is there? Do you care
Yeah.
about the things like that? There's no easy answer, and I have found that it really does change from game to game. It
Yeah.
really does. And that is a very, very odd thing that I have not structurally analyzed. That
Yeah.
risk to my character, and I don't care how much everyone says, oh, well, nobody truly owns their characters, because I have often said that nobody truly owns a character. I make games in which nobody truly owns a character. There's two of them behind your head right now. And and then I have other games, Spione and Shahida. Whereas in other games like Sorcerer, where you damn well do own your character, and you own it perhaps to an extent that you don't in plenty of games.
We're playing
So
it right now.
yeah, oh,
We're having a good
fantastic.
time.
So post about it, post. So the idea here though is that since that particular relationship of character ownership and character risk is clearly structured but not easily analyzed, the structure of it all at a larger level is not clear to us.
Right.
As you say, this is something that you may proceed with a little bit intuitively. The notion of risk to any character early is kind of interesting, because then what you have is an anyone can die, not knowing what's going to occur, highly emergent set of very consequential effects early on, and then things shake out into somewhat, and these are the last ones standing for the climax, and they
Right.
can't
This
die,
type of a,
right?
in
So in
this
other
type
that's
of
that's
game.
kind of a reverse, right? Of the
Right.
one might say, well, in the beginning, you can die, you can't die in the beginning because that would suck, and then you can die at the end because that's like consequential. That's sort of the
Yeah.
immediate intuitive approach, and there's nothing too terribly wrong with it. I am saying that flipping it is actually quite edgy,
It's
right?
interesting to
Yeah.
try.
Well, do
Right.
you see what I mean? But I'm thinking of the whole House of Spiders idea. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of the idea that, early on, this character looks like they are primed, to be a very heroic character, and that was a crossbow bolt that nailed them between the eyes after all.
Yeah.
And
The
the players
too in this type.
the players got to make up someone new, and that's okay. But then in late stage, that can't happen. No, now these characters standing are the ones who are going to take care of these final, events.
Right.
So
And
it's yeah,
you can just switch to an NPC really quick. So in this
right,
game,
right. It's not that
like
bad.
you say, it can give you that type of story, but then the cost isn't as much. You don't have to create a whole new
Right,
D&D character, so to
right.
speak.
I get that. And so what I'm trying to say is, given that there's room to play with when characters can die and when they can't. And then there's also room to play with um, other aspects of the fiction. You were talking about death. You know what? I think death is actually second place. First place would be power.
Yes.
First
Yes, I
place
agree.
would be the acquisition of power for good, not just, who's got the power of the moment, as we all stab each other in the back and the power passes, the moment of position and power kind of passes from hand to hand as we all maneuver. No, I'm talking about who nabs that particular brass ring. There may be more than one such brass ring, and
Right.
who nabs which one and gets it. And then that's not subject. Well, you can want the throne all you want from now on, asshole. Ain't no vote gonna get you that. I'm sitting on it, and we're at the late stage, and I'm on it. That's it. Too bad. And so the the notion there, I think, is more important than character death for a game like this.
Mm.
So
Oh yeah.
if we were to choose things, now let's stick with the fiction, things that whether to say what can and cannot happen at different stages, if anything. From what you're describing, the power seems like the thing that would become more locked down by the resolution of conflict in later play. Somebody could take the
Yes.
throne in the first act, but so what, right? But if they take the
Right.
throne in
This
the last act, they get it.
right.
And
The
so
way it's
yeah,
designed now is that person who is connecting the dots, building on other people's ideas, and bringing two threads or disparate ideas together. That's the person who's going to build that power because they're going to have those tokens, those narrative tokens, and to
yeah, but
influence things.
everybody's doing that. Remember, we're playing with a group that likes to do this. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah,
There's a
I don't know.
yeah, yeah. That's
Thanks for blowing
yeah.
it.
Say that again, please.
I said thanks for blowing it.
Well, it's a bit of a question. I mean, the notion that there is a bit of a competition for that can be a good thing or not. It's a question.
Mm,
So, and at the moment, while instrumentation is a good thing, there maybe this is a prejudice, and maybe I shouldn't use it as a consulting principle. Um, the gathering of tokens as a form of future impact on the narrative
mm-hmm.
is something that is, by and large, awfully. Uh, well, how am I going to put it? By and large, it has some pretty negative effects on play. Now, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it has to for a given design. But I'm thinking
Right.
about the one I always come to is the game that we played very eagerly when it came out. It was a Hogshead
Yeah.
game called Pantheon,
Uh
and
huh.
it billed itself as 5 games. They were all the same game, just with slightly different little skins. And it was very much an accumulate tokens, competing for story control kind of thing, which was a big thing at Hogshead. And frankly, it made play mean and not fun.
Really.
It was real easy just to get hosed and screwed out of participating and have bad things happen to all your stuff because someone else was able to get more tokens. And
Right.
it was real. And it basically just came down to a bunch of people, screwing each other over by being able to say things that the other person couldn't stop.
Quick
And
question
yeah,
for so to bring the game together, that's essentially, or to wind the game closer together, rather than it branching. The idea of the narrative token was essentially give that person who is uh, doing that the
right.
best, like a couple, 2 or 3 tokens during the game, and they get an extra round. Do you think that would become contentious?
It's not a question of
It's
whether it
hard.
becomes contentious. The question is whether it sounds like it's any fun. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, everybody's getting rounds. It's not like you're not getting a round. And it's also the case that I could have a round thrown to me by someone else just because my character is consequential to their character in some way. And so it's not like I'm sucking wind on. I mean, again, I haven't played, so I can't say. But I
Right.
don't feel as though I'm sucking wind on rounds. And if we are sucking wind on rounds, that doesn't it kind of suck for everybody else for me to get one? It kind of instead of giving me a cool thing, it's making everybody else. It's setting everyone else back.
True.
If we're sucking wind on the rounds and everybody wants one and we don't really feel like we're getting enough apiece, so then if that's not the case, then why would I care if I get that token? And if it is the case, isn't getting the token kind of sucky
Yeah.
as
So what do you
at the
think
table?
about the idea of
Well,
it adjusting one
oh,
degree?
well, I think that the basic idea of I wove things and just needs to be taken stock. We need to take stock of that. Is this a technique that really helps the experience of this game? The answer is yes. Weaving matters, right? We're
Right.
going to use past events. We're going to uh, we're going to have consequences from past events, and we're going to have reference, just mere reference to past events. All these
Right.
things are there. So with those happening, that's great. The story can look like it sprawls, and then glory be, it didn't. Glory be, it wasn't a sprawl. Masterful scripting, right? And so, that's great. I think that's good. But is that merely a technique that is part of what we do here?
Hmm.
The idea that you get a reward or a Benny for doing it implies that for whatever reason people are not doing it habitually.
Right.
And while it's true that these stories have a tendency to sprawl on their own, and it might be good to be reminded of this, it could be that we look at this procedurally somewhat differently and not think of B.F. Skinner's pigeon. Oh, if I do this, then I get that.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it in those terms, let's just say, all right, how is it that doing this makes play happen? Perhaps every time that happens and somebody says, "Oh, look, you wove things, you did that." Um, if you want to have tokens, then pop the tokens in, and then when you get enough tokens, you move to the next phase of play, or something, or if
Basically,
there's
figure out the
another
way that
signal,
works to
right?
incentivize.
Yeah, there are other ways in which we are enhancing play by the recognition of this kind of act.
Right.
And that's really what I'm driving at. Let's have it feed back into play rather than making it a privilege or a bonus or some kind of thing that we're supposed to be excited about for its own sake.
I'm just going to
Um,
write it down
does that
really
make
quick.
sense?
Yes.
Now, whether it serves as a signal for the next phase, I was just kind of spitballing that, or one could even say that it will be there may be dice involved later. Well, perhaps I don't know if it's a dice pool that we all share. I don't know if each of us just rolls a die for something, whatever. But let's say it's a dice pool that we all share. Well, maybe the number of these tokens is the size of the dice pool.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as long as it's not too annoying to track,
Yeah.
and also perhaps there's a top limit so that we don't end up with 52 tokens or something like that. You know,
Yeah.
the maybe it's limited to the opening of a scene rather than just happening, later on anytime. Whatever.
Yeah.
But the idea is that as long as you have some notion of it at that structural level, then I think that is a productive way of doing it.
Right.
And the another thing to consider now is you already have a dice mechanic. From the point of view whose character it is who wants something, the voting is a dice mechanic.
Right.
It already is. So if we're going to introduce more randomizing instrumentation, it should be hitting at a completely different level of play that is not the resolution of wants.
Okay.
Um, Lots of really interesting ways to look at this, actually. Did you ever look at Julia Ellingbo's game, Steal Away Jordan?
No, I haven't.
No, it's okay. The reason I bring it up is because she had a really, really interesting death die. And the idea was that in the outcomes of given conflicts, you also rolled a death die. And sometimes you did, and sometimes you didn't. Actually, I'm making it sound a lot less cool than it actually was. There was an element of how that worked that was particularly compelling. But what I'm trying to say is that the death die worked orthogonally to every other mechanic of the moment.
Right.
So, and it played a big role about the role of death in the lives of a slave. And, maybe the conflict was just about this, but it could turn out fatally for you anyway.
Yeah.
Stuff
That's
like
very
that.
exciting.
Yeah.
I
Well,
like
there's that. And again, as I recall, just procedurally it was a lot of fun. When the Death Die came out, everybody went cold. It was
that.
well done. The way, I mean, it wasn't
The tension.
just what I said, but the orthogonality is what I'm really aiming at. If you've
Mhm.
got the mechanism of resolving wants through the votes, then when and if you introduce a randomizing factor, whether it's draw a card from the special deck that you're producing with the game, whether it's rolling the dice or whatever, maybe it's off a table or something, I don't know. But it should be orthogonal to the resolution of the want as determined by the voting.
Now, there is a card element to the game.
Tell me about it.
Basically, it's optional, but if somebody wants a prompt, they can draw a card. Um, I could do it with a ref. You don't have to have uh, specific cards, but anyway, it will have either just an everyday language prompt or an abstract prompt. So, say one is an everyday language prompt could be something like an unwelcome stranger or something like
Right.
that, and that could be a prompt to think about you, whatever that means. It means to you, and then maybe the other one is the figurative one could be the serpent devours its tail, or the serpent eats its own tail. It's something that one's not so good or actionable, but
Every
but
rose
something
have
about,
its thorn. Every rose has
not
its
that damn
thorn.
bad.
Yeah. I could,
But some
any rock and roll
something.
ballad, lyric will work. Right. So, I get what you're saying. The consideration here is, what dynamics do you want to be occurring? Do you want it to be bouncier in terms of effect? Bouncier meaning terms of the less predictable the outcomes. And
Yeah,
also the force of the bounce, how much the systemic outcome actually impacts the fiction in irrecoverable ways. Let's just think of my character being captured. The first character I was talking about being captured. Captured, escape, captured, escape, captured, escape, captured, escape, 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 captured. You know what I mean? In other
trying to
words,
follow.
the point being that saying I want to get away from the King's Men in this scene is going to have nothing to do in 2 scenes from now when someone says, "Oh, you meet the King's Men again." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm getting away from them." In other words, it's Brownian motion. I'm in the same situation I was in before. I'm in a situation that's similar to the one before. The fact that I got away 2 scenes ago doesn't have anything to do with the fact of now I have to get away again, you know, and it has, in other words, there may have been a lot of sound and fury, but the escape that I did 2 scenes ago really might not have happened. Now, that means that thing, and it may be a very random set of resolution mechanisms or a very non-random set of resolution mechanisms. That doesn't matter. What matters is the force with which my outcome struck. If my outcome had a great deal of power to it, then that means when I escaped from the King's Men, that was the end of that. Don't be sending any more King's Men after me, okay? We did that.
Right. So are we talking about in case a prompt came up?
No, not at all.
Oh,
I'm talking
sorry,
about,
I'm not.
no, that's okay. I'm talking about the system itself.
Ah,
I'm talking about the system itself. How much does it nail down the acquisition of that want? Can somebody throw me in a situation where I basically just have to state that want again? Or more importantly, how escaped from the King's Men am I, having succeeded in that escape? And the same goes for almost any other outcome. And is that something you want to lock down for every conflict in play? Or is that something that you want to uh, basically just state as an aesthetic and hope everybody gets it? You know, don't just do the same damn thing over again.
right.
Or is it something that's a little bit more hard hitting systemically, which is that you like write it down, escape from the King's Men. That becomes a permanent fixture of my character that cannot be threatened by a scene frame.
Oh, I haven't
Things
dealt
like
with it
that.
yet. During play, it hasn't come up. Maybe it's the motivation to create a good story that has done that. I don't know, but it's something that I need to think about. So
The reason that I'm talking about it is we don't want to solve problems that don't exist, first of all. And we
right,
don't, and as you have been careful about, which I appreciate, you are not trying to save your game from people who don't want to play it. Right? You know,
right,
that's not a problem. Do you need to have a bidding mechanic in case we quote disagree? No. You know, enough already. Quit imagining dicks at the table and trying to stop them, okay? So, all right. With that, you know, yes, you're past that door. And so the issue then becomes, what then is the value of any such thing that I was just talking about? Well, there is kind of a value because it means as play proceeds, you may not even need stages if we are having these really, really solid consequences occur that are explicit and perhaps written down or something, you know?
right,
All of a sudden, the frameability of our characters starts to take on quite a bit of shape. I did
right.
win the tournament. I am the champion.
True.
Having an
And
unwelcome stranger show up to challenge me for the championship, fuck that, man. I won the championship. Can we be done? Right?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and so it's more interesting to frame scenes for me as the champion than it is to simply take it away, get it again, take it away, get it again. You
agreed.
know,
Yeah,
so you know, maybe there's something to that that simply is reinforcing rather than forcing us to do something in, you know, to save us from our bad behavior. Maybe it is reinforcing what we already would be doing, you know.
right,
And so
right,
that's, you know, that's a possibility to think about that. And then is that in and of itself a changing feature of play, or is that just a function of resolution, period? I mean, is that
right,
something that changes by stages? The idea of the stages really interests me. Stages can be imposed. The most obvious example is play as ordinary and then there is an end game. But I'm less interested in that. That's actually that's one way of doing things and it's a good one. In fact, I
right.
quite like it. But Then there is the act-based structure. This is the act in which this can be accomplished. This is the act in which this can be accomplished, and things are like this now. And we were talking about perhaps shifting the mechanics from these different phases or stages or acts. Well, that's possible. Then you have finally the third one, which has no such thing whatsoever. But it does have intrinsic properties to the resolution and consequences, which will facilitate the production of, an act structure as a, you know, perhaps an unusual one, perhaps one that will have different shapes from play to play, but
Right.
will be indeed rising action and resolution because that's what you do when you are using these mechanics.
Right.
And so all of those are available. Interestingly enough, the middle one seems to me to be the riskiest rather than the least risky. The imposing the act structure is actually the least reliable in terms of enjoying story structure. I'm not saying it's always a bad thing, but it is definitely not the go-to.
I haven't
And
even play tested it, so I'm
yeah,
more than willing to throw it
so
out.
well, perhaps playtesting it is a good idea, but what I'm interested in is if we have, say, enough. Okay, This is total spitballing. It's not a suggestion. This is a thought
Yeah.
experiment. Let's say I'm taking only things that you said. One of the things you said was that when somebody weaves, rather than just sending their character off to the Arctic, and all of a sudden it's all about whether he makes it through the night or not. When somebody weaves, then other people go hot diggity, and then you go over and you loot from your German Euro game that you have sitting on the shelf, and you take a little red counter, and you get a little red counter, and then perhaps it's thrown into the little bowl in the middle, which is a cool thing. So you do this, and then all of a sudden you know, uh, there is something that is done with the counters. When the dice are rolled, for example, again, spitballing, we're going to introduce dice. Perhaps anybody can say, okay, now we go to the dice at any time, but the number of dice that you're going to use is the number of tokens that are in the cup. And guess what? You empty the cup at that point. So now you can't use dice again until those tokens accumulate. And the number that accumulates is very, very interesting and emergent. Somebody might go to the dice when there's only one or two in there. Someone might go to the dice when there's 17 in there. I mean, 17 is probably kind of silly. I mean, we can
Right.
structure things so that that doesn't happen. But the idea is that, do you see what I'm getting at? And again, I'm trying to
Yeah,
make
very cool.
thought experiments out of elements that you have yourself personally introduced
Right.
into the conversation
Like
rather than myself.
introducing that
Right,
orthogonal mechanic and
right.
making it something fun for everyone where
Exactly.
we'll get
And
something out
also
of
the
it.
dice don't replace a vote. The dice do a thing that the voting never did, right? In
Right.
addition to it
Yeah.
or something like that. So you've got all that. Uh, in that context, you might be surprised at how much story structure actually emerges from that. I have, much to my enjoyment, yet again been playing the pool. And the pool is, as a mechanic, rather than just a title, the pool as a mechanic per character is a fascinating thing because it provides rises and fall for the character that are not fictional, but are only expressed ever in fictional terms.
Right.
And that is very, very wonderful. Who goes up, who goes down, who's flush, who's empty, that kind of thing, all really plays a huge role in what happens. The idea that when you have a big pool and are willing to risk lots or all of it, then that means your character can do stuff that is actually quite extravagant, might not even be using your own traits. Stuff that we haven't really seen your character shine in before.
Right.
Or In the case of the character who's very low in the pool, they could be very, very successful and be building their pool back up. But they would be doing so by playing very closely to their traits for maximizing their dice and
Hmm.
getting a lot of gift dice from the GM by taking things to do that are really not too dreadfully astonishing, or unlikely. So that way, the characterization of those two different, well, the display in action of those two different characters is extremely different, and it's played a big, and it's had a big. It's all based on what has literally happened, action by action, conflict by conflict, and it's very dynamic, and it often leads to a point where we're feeling rather climactic, and fictionally speaking.
Yeah.
And I have never seen the need to impose an act structure onto playing the pool. And yet, when you understand the game and are playing it, you will find that a session or series of sessions tends to have a rather satisfying arc to it from the point of view of the characters, especially. And so that's what I mean by these very, very intrinsic things. Um, Clearly, that kind of design is, if you will, harder. And act structure isn't in and of itself a bad thing, especially if its meaning is interesting, that you're doing things differently in this act than you were before,
Right.
or something like that. In a game such as you're talking about, oh, the possibilities just fly to mind, the crazy shit that one can do. Example number one, act structure. Characters rotate to the left. New act, characters rotate to the left. Act structure can
Oh
be
yeah.
very, very cool, but particularly if it does a thing like that. In other words, really make it act structure. You know what I mean? Really,
Yeah.
something really changes, and instead of it being fictional, something structural of the kind what I just suggested was actually extremely radical. For a game
Hmm.
such as House of Spiders, it's actually, instead of being merely intrusive and annoying like it would be in many games, what? Characters rotate to the left? No. What are you talking about? Why would I do that? But in a game like this, oh, ho, ho,
It's
ho.
it's interesting, right?
Actually, I could, I could fly with that. You know,
It might. It's definitely worth trying out.
yeah. So do you see what I'm getting at, though? I'm talking about these higher level structures of play. Do you or don't you want act structure imposed, and how? About what? Do you or don't you want the mechanics to have these intrinsic arc raising, arc developing features? Do you want the different kinds of mechanics to intersect? For example, the technique of weaving resulting in a dice pool that does a thing that's different from the ordinary resolution mechanic, stuff
Yeah.
like that. All of
Yeah.
these, I think, are factors to consider. Uh, and I have tried to stay. I mean, I held your feet to the fire about the setting in the beginning so thoroughly because
Uh,
only with that so nicely embedded in my mind could I be making these suggestions. These are not random suggestions. They are
right.
tunes to the kind of play that we're talking about, the kind of fiction that we're talking about.
Yeah. They're surprisingly good.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
and
Thank you.
that's a lot. That must be very good because I
Yeah.
have a lot of respect for you, Ron.
No, I appreciate that. Yes, but that's kind of the sense that I'm after, though, is that I would play this game because I am inspired by the cover and by the name,
Right.
and I would play this game because I would expect to have the procedures give me that creepy yet powerful consequential outcome kind of situation. I'll tell
Yeah.
you my go-to if we're talking about TV inspirations for this. My
Yeah.
go-to for what you're talking about actually isn't Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones as literature to me fails badly and did very thoroughly by the third book.
Right.
When I say literature might not be even the right word, just plain as something I care to read at all. Characters run around. They do the thing I was saying before. Escape, run away. Run away, run away, run. Oh, captured again. Oh, okay. Captured. Escape, run away. On and on and on and on. And so the point I'm trying to get at is let's make the game that doesn't do that. Let's make the game that does what I thought Game of Thrones was going to do, right?
Right.
Now, I'm not necessarily talking about
Did
the
you have
TV
a
show.
reference for that? Were you thinking
Oh,
of a
yes.
reference?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
It is my great guilty pleasure of television viewing. It is the Spartacus series from Starz, which I like to say is barely manages to be plot with porn as opposed to porn with plot,
Right.
and is, however, ends up being astoundingly good as a story, and evidently so by the second or third episode. I would have to say, yeah, that would be my go-to. That's where you have a bunch of characters, many of whom are quite wretched, quite quite awful, and yet the terrible things they do to one another and to the people that they are targeting, and so on purpose, not on purpose, and so on. All of those things manage to stay away from merely being an exercise in round and round and round and round and robin shittiness.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean that's kind of an interesting. That would be sort of if we're thinking about mass media, visual media, binge watch, inspirations. That would be my primary. Uh, that would be kind of my primary. If
Check it.
you don't mind my saying, the impression I get from your presentation and the visuals of it and the name itself is that it would be kind of nice if the ability to do extraordinarily powerful and consequential things through influence, through privilege, through control of information, through patience were there are no Gordian knots here. The sword cannot cut the Gordian knot here,
Uh-huh.
or maybe only, the in extraordinary circumstances can this happen. After all, just to take Spartacus as an example, the rebellion fails. He does try to cut the Gordian knot of slavery and Roman privilege. He tries to cut it with a sword. It doesn't work.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I'm not saying necessarily that that's how it has to turn out in a game of House of Spiders, but the potential for the web to be more powerful than the sword is seems written in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems written in. And that's why I was thinking about my character, who is now, and my outlawy character who's escaped from the prison and is roaming around being, a pain in the ass, became a lot less interesting to me than my lacy dressed trans character, you know,
Gotcha.
who basically seems like the dilettante hanging around, in the useless rich people land.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, with that kind of, with those concepts in mind, really you could go any which way with the notion of story arcs and acts and phases. They could be explicit, they could be baked into the rules as such. The rules as such, on the other hand, can merely facilitate their appearance. Um, they could be either way, they could be mechanically distinctive or they could be not mechanically distinctive. They can be fictionally distinctive or not fictionally distinctive.
Hmm.
You've got quite a wealth of options
Yeah.
to play with. And
I
say that again.
said it's going to take a long time.
Well, that's true, but it's not as though you have to find every combo and play test it in a kind of an engineering, modeling sense, so
Right.
much as really kind of get aesthetic again. Just get aesthetic again and say, what do I like the most?
Right.
How is it most fun for me? And I completely grant you, relying on the social contract of this is what we came here to do. But to use my card analogy, that's why we want the rules that work awfully, awfully, awfully well for it,
Right.
right? Rather, I'm not talking about rules that make us do it when we don't know how or are morons or don't want to do it or something. I'm talking about the mechanics. I say card mechanics. The mechanics that make us really, really glad that we found this game to do it with.
Right.
So, that's where that system matters in a nutshell right there, right? I mean, if only I could have said that in 1999. In 1991-ish, I was writing something that would be very sorcerous. And my thought was that the best thing to do was to take Cyberpunk, in what they were calling the interlock system,
Hmm.
and use that. Um, and another way to do it that came to me was to use old RuneQuest using just the Shaman rules and have that be sorcerer. And so there I was, and I have drafts for these. The fact that I did another thing entirely and used instead the Fantasy Trip and Over the Edge as my primary influences. Instead, I did that, but that doesn't mean that was time wasted.
Right.
So it could be that we come up with kind of a spit and baling wire thing to play and not say, and you can even call it House of Spiders, right? But we don't have to believe that this is uh, we don't have to believe that this is the necessary and absolute and committed actual game in mind. In many ways, having played it, and even if it works beautifully, you could say that's not what I wanted,
Right.
but now I know.
Right.
So if I do suggest a larger structure for this or a set of rules for it, I hope you can see that it will be in the spirit of such an object.
Oh yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
That's really, pretty important actually. So anyway, that's that. Hope
Awesome.
yeah.
Do you plan on posting this then?
Yeah, if it's okay with you.
Yes, please
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.